April 8, 1994, an electrician arrived at a house in Seattle to install security lighting. He looked through a window above the garage and saw a body. Kurt Cobain had been dead for 3 days. Next to him was a shotgun, a box of cigarettes, and a pen, blue ink, 1.5 pages, a suicide note. The police released it to the public. Millions of people read it, but almost nobody understood it, because suicide notes aren't written to be understood. They're written to be decoded. And in Kurt's note, buried between the famous lines everyone quotes, are 5 sentences that reveal exactly when and why he decided to die. This is not speculation. This is psychological forensics, because Kurt didn't just write a goodbye. He wrote a confession. The note begins with a greeting. This note should be pretty easy to understand, but it's not. It's one of the most complex psychological documents in modern music history, because what Kurt wrote on the surface is not what he meant underneath, and the 5 lines everyone missed are the ones that explain everything: his childhood, his stomach pain, his heroin addiction, his relationship with fame, and the exact moment he gave up. Not on April 5, 1994, years before, he just finally acted on it. Let's start with the first line everyone skipped. I haven't felt the excitement of listening to, as well as creating music, along with really writing, for too many years now. Most people read this and think, Kurt lost his passion for music. He was burned out. He couldn't create anymore, so he quit. But that's not what this line says. Read it again. For too many years now. Not months, not recently, years, plural. This means Kurt stopped feeling excitement about music long before 1994, long before In Utero, possibly as far back as Nevermind, which means the entire second half of his career, the albums, the tours, the fame, all of it, he was performing while feeling nothing. He was a shell, going through the motions, and nobody noticed. This is called anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. It's one of the core symptoms of severe depression, but it's also something deeper, because Kurt didn't just lose interest in music. He lost the ability to connect with the thing that had saved him as a child. Music was his escape, his sanctuary, the one place where the chaos of his childhood, the divorce, the poverty, the moving from house to house, none of it mattered. When he had a guitar, he had control, he had meaning, and now, as an adult, at the peak of success, that meaning was gone. The escape route had closed, and if music couldn't save him anymore, nothing could. But here's the part everyone misses. He says listening to as well as creating. Not just playing music, listening to it, which means Kurt couldn't even enjoy other people's music anymore. He couldn't put on a record and feel something. He was numb, completely disconnected. And when you lose the ability to feel joy from the things that used to bring you joy, you start asking a very dangerous question. What's the point? If nothing feels good anymore, why keep going? And for Kurt, the answer was clear. There wasn't a point. Not anymore. The second line is even more devastating. The fact is, I can't fool you, any one of you. Most people interpret this as Kurt admitting he was a fraud, that he couldn't fake enthusiasm on stage anymore, that the fans would see through him. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying he can't fool you anymore, which means he had been fooling people for years. The smiles, the performances, the interviews, all of it was a mask, and now the mask was cracking, and he didn't have the energy to hold it together anymore. This is the exhaustion of long-term depression, the constant performance of being okay. Kurt wasn't just tired of being famous, he was tired of pretending to be alive, because when you're severely depressed, every interaction is an act. You smile because people expect you to smile. You laugh because people expect you to laugh. You say I'm fine because saying I want to die makes people uncomfortable. So you perform, every single day, until you can't anymore. And for Kurt, April 1994 was when he couldn't anymore. But there's another layer here. I can't fool you, any one of you. Not I can't fool everyone, any one of you. Singular. Which suggests Kurt believed that even if he could fool the masses, there were individuals, specific people who saw through him. Courtney, maybe, Christ, Dave, people who knew him well enough to see the emptiness. And the shame of that, the humiliation of being seen as broken, was unbearable, because Kurt's entire identity was built on authenticity. Nirvana was supposed to be real, raw, honest, and if he was faking it, if he was just another performer going through the motions, then what was he? Just another sellout, which for Kurt was worse than death. The third line is where it gets clinical. The worst crime I can think of would be to rip people off by faking it and pretending as if I'm having 100% fun. On the surface, this sounds noble. Kurt didn't want to cheat his fans, he didn't want to perform half-heartedly. But look at the language. The worst crime I can think of. Not disappointing people, not letting them down. Crime, as if continuing to live and perform while depressed would be a moral violation. This is catastrophic thinking. The belief that his existence, his survival, would be an act of fraud, and therefore the only ethical option was to stop existing. This is what untreated depression does. It convinces you that you are the problem, that your pain is justified, that the world would be better off without you. And Kurt had internalized this belief so deeply that he framed his suicide as an act of integrity. He wasn't giving up, he was refusing to compromise. He was protecting the purity of nirvana by removing himself from it. It's a twisted logic, but it's the logic of someone who has been depressed for so long that death feels like the honorable choice. And here's the part that breaks my heart. Kurt thought he was protecting his fans by killing himself. He thought he was doing them a favor, because in his mind, a dead Kurt Cobain who meant something was better than a living Kurt Cobain who was faking it. He didn't understand that his fans didn't need perfection. They needed him, alive, struggling, human. But depression doesn't let you see that. It tells you that you're a burden, that you're failing everyone, that the kindest thing you can do is disappear. And Kurt believed it. The fourth line is the one that reveals his relationship with his daughter. I have a goddess of a wife who sweats ambition and empathy, and a daughter who reminds me too much of what I used to be, full of love and joy, kissing every person she meets because everyone is good and will do her no harm. Most people focus on the first part, the praise for Courtney. But the second part is the killer. A daughter who reminds me too much of what I used to be, not what he is, what he used to be, past tense, which means when Kurt looked at Frances, he didn't see hope, he saw loss. He saw the version of himself that died, the child who believed in people, who trusted, who loved freely, and that child was gone, murdered by divorce, by poverty, by bullying, by fame, by pain, by heroin. And Frances, innocent and trusting, was a mirror reflecting everything Kurt had lost, and he couldn't bear it. This is one of the cruelest ironies of depression. The things that should bring you joy, your child, your family, become sources of pain, because they remind you of what you can no longer feel. Kurt loved Frances, but he couldn't connect with that love. It was there intellectually, but emotionally, it was behind glass, unreachable. And the guilt of that, the shame of being a father who couldn't feel what he was supposed to feel, was unbearable. So instead of seeing Frances as a reason to live, he saw her as evidence of his brokenness, proof that he was too damaged to be a father, too numb to be human, and if he couldn't even love his own daughter the way she deserved, what was the point of staying? But there's something even darker in this line. Everyone is good, and will do her no harm. Kurt knew that wasn't true. The world had harmed him, relentlessly. And Frances, innocent and open, was walking into the same world, and he couldn't protect her, because he couldn't even protect himself. So what does a depressed, hopeless father do when he believes the world will destroy his daughter, and he's powerless to stop it? He removes himself from the equation. Not because he doesn't love her, but because he believes his presence won't make a difference, and his absence at least won't add to her pain. It's a horrifying calculation, but it's the calculation he made. The fifth line is the most quoted and the most misunderstood. It's better to burn out than to fade away. Everyone knows this is a Neil Young lyric from My Hey Hey, and most people interpret it as Kurt choosing a dramatic exit over a slow decline, going out on top. Rock and roll mythology. But that's not what this line means in the context of Kurt's note, because Kurt wasn't at his peak. He was in chronic pain, addicted to heroin, depressed, suicidal. He wasn't burning out, he was fading away, and he knew it. So why quote this line? Because it's a lie he told himself to justify what he was about to do. Kurt didn't want to burn out. He wanted the pain to stop. But I can't take the pain anymore doesn't sound noble, It sounds weak. And Kurt, despite everything, still cared about his image. He still wanted to be seen as authentic, as someone who chose his fate rather than surrendering to it. So he borrowed Neil Young's words, dressed up his suicide as a rebellion, as a refusal to compromise, when in reality, it was a surrender to pain, to exhaustion, to the belief that nothing would ever get better. And here's the tragedy. Neil Young wrote that line about Johnny Rotten, about punk, about the choice between staying dangerous and becoming safe. It was never about suicide. But Kurt recontextualized it, turned it into a suicide manifesto, and in doing so, he created a myth, the myth that his death was a choice, a statement, when really, it was just the final symptom of a disease he never got help for. Let's talk about what Kurt didn't write. He didn't write, "I'm in pain." He didn't write, "I need help." He didn't write, "I'm scared." He wrote a philosophical treatise, a justification, a defense of his decision, because that's what suicidal people do. They rationalize. They construct narratives that make their death seem inevitable, necessary, even noble. And Kurt's note is a masterclass in that rationalization. Every line is a brick in the wall he built to convince himself that dying was the only option. But it wasn't. Kurt Cobain didn't have to die. He had chronic stomach pain. That's treatable. He had depression. That's treatable. He had addiction. That's treatable. He had trauma. That's treatable. But he never got treatment. Not real treatment. Not the kind that involves months of therapy, medication adjustments, pain management, rehab, and a support system that doesn't enable. He got band-aids, detox, followed by relapse, interventions followed by escape. And when the band-aids stopped working, he gave up. And here's what makes me angry. Kurt had resources. He had money. He had access. He could have gone to the best treatment centers in the world. He could have hired a team of doctors. He could have taken a year off, disappeared, healed. But he didn't, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't believe it would work. He had tried before, and it didn't fix him, so he assumed nothing would. And that assumption killed him. This is the danger of untreated chronic depression. It doesn't just make you sad, it makes you certain. Certain that nothing will help, certain that you're broken beyond repair, certain that death is the only way out. And once that certainty takes hold, every piece of evidence to the contrary gets dismissed. People telling you they love you, they're lying. Doctors saying you can get better, they don't understand. Your daughter needing you, she'll be fine without you. The certainty becomes a cage, and Kurt locked himself inside. April 50, 1994, Kurt Cobain climbed the stairs to the room above his garage. He brought a shotgun, a pack of cigarettes, and a pen. He sat down. He wrote his note. And then he ended his life. He was 27 years old. He left behind a wife, a daughter, a band, and millions of fans who would spend the next 30 years trying to understand why. And the answer is in the note. Not in the famous lines, but in the ones everyone missed. The ones that reveal a man who had been dying for years, who had lost the ability to feel, who had convinced himself that his death was an act of integrity rather than an act of despair, who believed, truly believed, that the world would be better without him. He was wrong. Francis grew up without a father. Courtney spiraled. Chris and Dave carried the guilt, and a generation of kids who saw Kurt as proof that it was okay to be broken, to be angry, to be different, lost their voice. Because Kurt didn't just die. He taught a million kids that if it gets too hard, you can always check out, and some of them did. And that's the real tragedy. Not that Kurt died, but that his death became a template. Here's what Kurt didn't know. Depression lies. It tells you that you're worthless, that nobody cares, that nothing will ever get better. And if you listen to it long enough, you start to believe it. But it's not true. It's a chemical imbalance. It's a disease. And like all diseases, it can be treated, not cured, maybe, but managed. Kurt could have lived. He could have seen Francis grow up. He could have made more music. He could have found a way to exist that didn't require performing joy he didn't feel. But he never gave himself the chance, because he believed the lie. And that's the lesson of the 5 lines. They're not wisdom. They're symptoms. Symptoms of a disease that went untreated for too long. And if you're reading this, and you see yourself in those lines, if you've ever felt that numb, that exhausted, that certain that nothing will help, please understand, that's the disease talking, not you, and the disease is wrong. Kurt Cobain didn't have to die, and neither do you.